Hello and welcome. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. We'll be getting started in just a couple of minutes, and so we want to give a minute or two for everybody to hop on the webinar. While you're waiting, you could pop in the chat. What is your current, if you could describe in 2 words, what's your current marketing measurement looking like right now? Is it, you know, excited and well, or what are some really 2-word marketing measurement? Not getting a lot. Yeah, what would your current marketing reporting look like? Feeling optimistic. I like that. All right, that's a good sign. That's a good sign. Getting better. Okay. A lot of hopeful ideas here. I like it. Needing improvement. Well, that's good. You came to the right webinar today. Steady growth. Very good. Okay, well, it is 1 o'clock, so we can go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mindy Avitia, and I am the Associate Director of Brand Marketing here at Mighty Citizen. We're here today for How to Measure What Matters in the Zero-Click Era. I'm joined by my colleagues, Alicia Ritchie, Senior Marketing Strategist, and Jamie Pratt, Associate Director of Digital Marketing. And thank you for joining us. I'll start with a couple housekeeping items. If you have questions during the webinar, to make sure they aren't missed, please post them in the Q&A area of the Zoom as opposed to the chat. I'll be on the chat and we'll be monitoring any that come through, but we do ask that you try to post any questions in the Q&A that they may get lost in the chat throughout. We also have closed captioning at the bottom available. There is a live transcript option at the bottom of the screen where you can enable it if you need it. And we will have time at the end to go over questions, so feel free to ask them throughout the presentation as they come up, and we'll do our best to get to them at the end. And then lastly, the presentation slides, recording, and some tools will be sent to each attendee after the webinar. We will share some resources in the chat during the presentation as well. So, all right, I think we're ready to get started. I'm gonna hand it over to Alicia and Jamie.
Thank you, Mindy. Hello, everyone. Yes, we are talking about how to measure what matters. In the zero-click era, what does zero-click mean? We'll get to that later, but basically talking about things like disconnected funnels, broken attribution, all of the dark traffic issues, anything that makes it harder for you to prove the worth of your marketing efforts. Just a brief reminder, if you don't know who we are, Mighty Citizen is a digital agency that focuses on mission-based organizations like higher education, nonprofits, professional associations. We do marketing and websites and other branding work with strategic thinking, great digital transformation strategies, and creative. Like Mindy said, I'm Jamie. I'm Associate Director of Digital Marketing. This is a heavily overused meme that I use in our work chat. It's basically my reaction to everything.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alicia, Senior Marketing Strategist. Favorite unhinged meme to use in a work chat. This was actually very hard for me to pinpoint as what is my favorite one. Actually, I would love to hear if you use any unhinged memes in chat if you have one. But for me, this one won out. It just seems to apply every week to every situation almost. It was actually between this and the It's Always Sunny Charlie Day trying to put together the red string theory around Pepe Sylvia, which also is applicable most weeks as well.
This is very true.
Yep. Yep. Joy. I think Joy. I mean, it might be me and Joy sending it to each other, actually, now that I see this in chat. Oh, yogurt taxidermy mouse meme this morning. I wish we could send memes through chat throughout this conversation. We should send that suggestion to Zoom. But alas, we can't talk about memes all day. although it'd be nice if we could. But Jamie, go to the next slide. We can get into the learning objectives. So today, by the end of the webinar, you will have a full picture of what vanity metrics are and what they are not. You will know how to start tracking success at each stage of your marketing funnel, and also understand why these metrics have a bad rap and how you can use them effectively. So let's start at the very beginning. And now I'm thinking we should have dropped in like that Sound of Music meme, but it's fine. The current reality of higher ed metrics. So right now, content is being provided directly on platforms thanks to the prevalence of zero-click marketing. So users, they're getting answers without clicking through to a website, and they're not landing on your website, unfortunately. Jamie, do you have any thoughts on zero-click marketing? I know you do.
I do, and I'm sure that I will have much ranting in further slides, but generally, we're just in an era where multi-touch attribution is fundamentally broken, both from a tracking perspective and from a, you know, practical perspective. Platforms do not like to share traffic, and they in our tracking systems because of things like users having more privacy options, browsers with cookie blocking, all of these things, you know, multi-touch between different devices, different apps and browsers. We just have we have less and less visibility into how users are interacting with us in, you know, multiple settings.
All right, so let's talk about the current landscape and how this affects higher ed institutions. Across universities, stakeholders, they want metrics. They need to know, are things hitting, are business goals succeeding? And so vanity metrics tend to be emphasized because they're quick, they're accessible, and they appear to be successful. And an example I can give, so in my previous life, before joining Mighty Citizen, I worked at a handful of universities, multiple departments at different phases of the funnel. And we encountered this frequently. So one example is when I was working at a business school, we had a bunch of different stakeholders. We had our corporate sponsors, my managers, and also the dean's office. And these different groups wanted to see different things. And sometimes we would show them what we think was important, but they would come back and say, we really want these types of things like impressions, page views. And to be fair to them, like I said, vanity metrics, they are pervasive within most institutions because they're easy to report. At this point, leadership, they're very familiar with these types of things. Plus, they look good. This is the biggest thing. They look good in a slide deck. I would sit in meetings where my various stakeholders would get very excited that we got 500,000 impressions. And I was slightly dying inside because I knew further down the funnel, certain numbers weren't great. Those impressions weren't really yielding anything. And truth be told, those impressions, not even just impressions, but the vanity metric numbers, they rarely answer the questions leadership actually care about. So questions they're thinking about, like, is this driving enrollment, engagement, or retention? On to the next. Okay. Another thing that institutions are up against during the zero-click marketing era is that Gen Z especially, they're getting their information elsewhere. They're not landing on your website. Because today with AI queries, you can go into a search engine, you can compare something like top nursing programs, and it would give you something like this on the left. There's really no guarantee that the prospect will click any of these links during that awareness and research phase. Because again, zero-click marketing is really designed to keep users inside. So aside from Google answering questions directly through snippets and AI summaries, you are competing with things like Instagram and TikTok. And this is where both prospective and current students, they're spending their time there and they're using them as search engines. and the platforms are delivering the full value in feed. And this is a feature that may change down the line. It seems like for creators, they're getting excited at the thought of it. But right now on Instagram, for example, you have to say, click link in bio. And let's be real, how compelling is your post that makes this person want to interrupt their daily scroll to go back to your profile page, go to your bio, click on your link tree, scroll down and find the one they're looking for? They're not. And it's designed intentionally, right? It's to keep them on Instagram, to keep them doom scrolling. So it's something to think about when you think about your metrics. Your audience isn't clicking less because they're disengaged. They're truly clicking less because they don't have to. They are watching campus tours on TikTok. They're reading the program summaries on Google results. And they're going to something like Niche on the right, the image on the right. And I promise that's the correct pronunciation. I worked with them directly. So Niche is a research tool to compare universities. You can save the universities during the research process. So unfortunately, that decision journey, it's happening without you seeing it. You can't really attribute the traffic coming. Well, I guess you can, but you don't really know why they ended up applying or going to your program page because they're doing all this stuff off your site. On to the next. This looks very familiar, I'm sure, to all of you. This is a typical marketing funnel when you consider the full student life cycle. And just look at all the different motivations. And now imagine all the departments doing all the various activities around each of these phases. And truly, the funnel is supposed to be, they're trickling down the journey. But the truth is, it's not that seamless when you consider a cohesive marketing journey. When you factor in tracking data too and coming up with actionable insights, this is very misleading because it actually looks like something else. It looks like this. It looks like a mess. The funnel phases, they're fractured due to, silos. Different groups are focusing on different goals. And so there's disconnect between things, for example, like brand awareness. Additionally, everyone is tracking different things. If they are tracking anything at all, I know different departments have different policies around that. There's also hardly any data sharing unless someone asks. And even then, there's no guarantee the data owner will share if they're feeling proprietary or if there's, again, policies in place where they maybe can't share certain bits of data. So in another past life, when I was at the University of Colorado, Denver, my role was as an enrollment. It was in enrollment marketing, and I was supposed to bring cohesion and break silos. My job was to be a silo breaker within the marketing funnel across the entire journey. And we had to hit our enrollment and also retention goals. So for us, we had the vendor fill the top of the funnel with prospects, and then it was my job to nurture leads into applicants and then ultimately convert them into admitted students. But in most cases, at most places, the buck stops there because we all had different ownership across this funnel. In my case, once they were an admitted student, they weren't mine anymore. They were then owned by student success. And then my group, we primarily used a CRM called Slate. And that did not feed into what student success was using, which was a product called Navigate. So unfortunately, by the time they were working on getting students to sign up for classes and orientation and yield them, they had no supplemental information on them, except maybe their program and the basic demographic journey. They weren't privy to conversations that took place. Again, that decision journey, they were in the dark. So really, how could they successfully personalize the student experience and drive success if there's like a gap in information? And so in the role I mentioned, I had to actively get the departments to connect once a quarter. We had to share goals, determine what could be optimized, and what were ways to share data to identify where we could find those actionable insights. And again, going beyond those vanity metrics. By the end of my tenure there, we had some view-only dashboards. Some groups shared Tableau with us, but we were able to at least get more information. And it wasn't perfectly seamless, but we tried our best to really inject intentionality around the data. So by the time that student journey made it to the bottom of the funnel, our alumni relations group, they had a more robust picture of the student truly from the beginning to the end, instead of just kind of having half the story.
Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about vanity metrics themselves. The two words that when we were coming up with this presentation that we felt like described, the commonly, common understanding of what a vanity metric is, or at least why they're problematic, are they're disparate and they're disconnected. So by disparate, we mean different platforms, different metrics, different context, different framing. They all, even if they share the same word, they might not measure the exact same thing, or they might measure things in very different contexts. And by disconnected, all the things we've been talking about with things like broken funnels, attribution being more difficult every day. So let's start with the first one, or let's a little back, go back. We probably all know what the phrase vanity metric is, but let's just break it down a little bit. What are they? They're metrics that sound good, but don't actually show marketing results. Historically, when marketers have used this phrase, what we really mean is BS. Like, how are we going to show performance to, a higher stakeholder even if we can't actually show them metrics that show high performance. So numbers a marketer can show to someone that's, above them, whether that's, a vendor showing metrics to their client, or, a marketer showing performance data to their boss, basically someone with a broader knowledge set that doesn't have that silo experience to get them off our back and prove that you've done the job well, even if it hasn't made a difference to the organization's goals. So the classic case, and it's one that Alicia and my coworkers have heard me rant about many times, is a university or some other organization brings in a digital agency to run an ad campaign, let's say, for example, on social media to boost enrollment. They do a 90-day campaign, and after 90 days, the agency sends a performance report. It's full of flashy numbers, really great bar graphs that show increases in all their numbers. There's hundreds of thousands of impressions. There's low CPMs. The click-through rate is super high. It looks great, right? You're going to be super happy with your digital agency that's sending you this report. But how much impact did that campaign actually have on enrollment? Did they show a boost in RFIs? Did applications year over year go up from like actual applications from students? Were there more campus tours booked? None of that you're able to see from platform specific metrics that you get from this type of reporting. So good platform native performance numbers really just indicate that a campaign did well on the platform itself, or at least can look like it did well, not that it was actually effective for the organization. Okay, so we are curious, do you feel that your leadership understands the metrics that you're sharing with them or that is being shared with the team? I'd love if you have any interesting examples of this, if you could throw it into the chat, because I'm sure that we all have had similar experiences with this.
Yep, we haven't, not necessarily. I think a lot of times, again, like leadership think they know and they have an idea, but they don't actually.
Mhm.
Oh, it's so
Right.
painful. Yep. Just basic traffic stats. They think that's important. In addition to data points and graphs, we also provide storytelling for clarity. That's great. Leadership was thrilled to impressions, but never question. It's horrible, right? And that's, I think, the reason why leadership loves impressions is because that just has the highest number of all the vanity metrics. Easily
Sure.
wowed. Yes. Very easily wowed. And they do need the storytelling. Yep. Yep. So I think we're all in consensus that it's an imperfect system of reporting that we're dealing with in this environment.
Absolutely. And I love the storytelling aspect. It's not one that we have a ton of that we're going to talk about a ton of in this deck, but that's kind of we're talking about a little bit more on the technical side. But that's kind of the mirror image of what we're talking about, like the extra part in terms of framing some of this stuff. Okay, so what do we mean by disparate metrics? I talked about this a little bit before, but these are platform-specific metrics that are only relevant to that platform. For example, some of them even have use the same words, but they measure different things, or at least in a different context. So if we're looking at organic search impressions in Google Search Console, technically that is the same thing as an impression from Google Ads, right? But not only are they different platforms, but the users are doing different things. So those don't actually match up. And if you're only using impressions to show um, performance, then you're really not giving an actual picture to anyone else on your team. Similarly, a page view on your website and an email open, they both measure someone viewing that piece of content, but it's a fundamentally different user interaction in a fundamentally different part of the funnel. Um, so all of these things really measure this a similar user interaction viewing a thing, but they're completely disparate. They are almost meaningless to each other. Okay, so the problem nowadays, we don't really have that much of a choice. Um, we only really get these platform native metrics. We only get traditionally what are called vanity metrics. These platforms don't talk to each other. Um, Even Google Analytics, it's not always a given that if someone does click a ad on Meta and goes to your website, that it's going to get attributed correctly, even to the right channel. Depending on, say they're coming from a mobile app and they go to their browser and they're using Safari with tracking completely blocked off, that's going to show up as direct traffic or have the channel just completely empty in that data in GA4. So, you know, there's so much that they're not interacting with each other, these platforms. And not only that, they don't like to share traffic with each other. We've talked about that a good bit already, but things like LinkedIn never like not showing posts that include a link as the main piece of content. This is why we all know that people will post content on LinkedIn with a bunch of text in the main post and then say link in the first comment, because if they put the link in the actual post, it's not going to show to as many people. And that's true of so many different platforms, including, Google search with AI overviews. Every time they add new ways of interacting with the results, it makes it less likely that a user is actually going to click through away from Google search results. And not only that, but users generally don't convert on their first interaction. This is why we've always used most often in marketing last click attribution or last non-direct click, because we know that there are multi steps in the funnel. And that's just becomes more and more true each year, basically. So let's go through a couple of the stages of this funnel, starting with interest. So this is probably I skipped ahead. Sorry. Excuse me. Starting with awareness. So social networks, as I was just talking about, hoard traffic. So if we're starting from this example of an Instagram ad, making that traffic from that ad attributable to a specific social campaign is near impossible. So say our hypothetical high school senior sees an Instagram ad from your university. We get impressions and potentially clicks from Meta Business Manager, right? That doesn't really go past this stage of the funnel. The next funnel is interest, right? Excuse me, the next stage is interest. So in this example, talking about the student then, maybe 2 days later, they're thinking about schools again and they remember that they saw that ad, the awareness ad worked. They're aware of your university. So they search for that by name on Google. they go to the site, maybe click around, read about academics, student life, look at photos. All of this we will see in Google Analytics 4 if it's set up properly, things like sessions and page views, events, depending on what your setup is. This is almost the most valuable phase in the journey where I think feel like a user is most likely to make a decision, at least to, show convert to someone who fills out an RFI or, potentially applies, not necessarily, you know, whether or not they'll become a student. Um, but they typically don't convert at this stage, even if it's the most valuable. And since this session will likely stand in isolation in your tracking, you won't know directly when that specific user converts to an applied student or an enrolled student. And when that happens, we're thinking about the consideration stage. So the student types in, a week later, they're thinking about schools again, or their parents bothered them to start doing more research. They know your university's name, they know your website, so they just type in the URL, and they come to the site as direct traffic, right? They visit, they fill out the RFI form. If you have that traffic set up, it will come through as, that event, that RFI form submission in GA4. Again, not attributable to any of the previous touches that the user had with you. It's not possible to connect this and attribute it to that marketing funnel. It stands on its own. And this is where a traditional last click attribution model would give credit for that conversion. So, if you're showing where did conversions come from to your higher stakeholders, and they see, oh, 90% of our RFIs came from people who direct traffic to the site. Why are we wasting money on meta ads and SEO content when people are just typing in the URL and not even coming from those other platforms? You don't have the specific information to refute that in this model. And then even taking it one step further, when a student actually applies to the school, depending on, what your setup is at your university, they're either applying directly, if it's with a paper application or something like Common App, some of these apps that these internal systems that you all use, the school has all that data about the specific application and that prospective student, but we don't have any data about their journey, their attribution. You may have fields on the form that say, like, how did you find out about us? But that's not actually connected to your data.
Yeah, so we're just going to really quickly go through some examples, some of the common things that you're seeing in terms of vanity metrics. Oh, impressions, of course. We talked about this, but unfortunately, like we all talked about, leadership loves it. However, without intent signals, these numbers are truly meaningless. Now, if we think about impressions and think about if they led to things like program page visits, return visits, inquiry forms, starts, not completions necessary, but starts, those are all high intent, and they're pretty important. I would say if you can get away with it, and I know most of you won't be able to, I wouldn't even show impressions in a report. I got it to a point where one of my stakeholder groups, I really emphasized some of the more valuable metrics that we're going to talk about here shortly. And I was able to just show them sort of what mattered, and they didn't need to see all this extra fluff. And the education process took a while, but they finally agreed. Again, this is one group of many. But what I did have was an internal report for myself, because there were moments where maybe I needed to see, maybe this could indicate performance a little bit, or maybe I needed to calculate a conversion rate from impressions. So I still pulled the information. There were just certain groups I could get away with not necessarily distracting them and getting them off task by showing these, which again, it's a difficult tip to follow, but if you can swing it, I would try. Of course, social followers, massive follower numbers are great, but layering something on it's better if they're sharing, saving, commenting, asking questions, or tagging your account, right? The engagement piece is more important than the follower number itself. Also, at this point, we're all pretty wary of high follower accounts with low engagement because are these bots? That's usually my first question. Like, is this even real? They have two comments and like 20,000 followers. Maybe they are real, and then maybe you're not getting engagement because your content simply isn't resonating or your social strategy isn't playing nicely with each of the platform's algorithms. So to me, a micro influencer in this case would be more powerful than a 1 million follower account, even if their audience is smaller, if they're more bought in. That is more valuable than a bigger account that's, to me, mostly smoke and mirrors. But leadership also likes follower numbers, unfortunately. Alluding to the social engagement, this is a vanity metric, yes. But things like engaged reach, that's important because they'll tell us something. They tell us something, right? I also think average watch time is a pretty good indicator of engagement, scroll depth, saves, all of these tell a story. But at the end of the day, the social engagement is still a vanity metric because it doesn't necessarily determine there's any ROI in the end. Branded search volumes. This is how often people search for your brand by name. This one's tricky to me because you would think that how often people search for your brand by name, that's very meaningful. But maybe it's just an indicator for how well your awareness campaign is going, right? Because as in the case of social engagement, it's still surface level. We can't glean any kind of ROI just because people know who you are. As you can see, I snuck in my Charlie Day meme. I managed to find a spot. So what vanity metrics also look like, these are things like large applicant pools, but small enrollments. Again, social media followers, no interaction, program page views, but nobody's filling out your RFI form. And then high email open rates with no clicks, no follow through to donate, no conversion, right? So this demonstrates a breakdown, especially in conversion. And the actual insight here is you got to figure out how to fix it. Here's an example how layering more valuable data to vanity metrics can result in meeting business goals. So back to my example at the business school, we put out a new white paper and we had a ton of landing page traffic from our digital campaigns. We also had high open rates and click-through rates. Again, looks great in reporting. Our corporate stakeholders were very pleased. But when I pulled the conversions, nobody was downloading the white paper. So conversion spoke to a bigger problem because the vanity metrics told me people are interested in this, but something is stopping them from converting. So to course correct, we worked through user experience, and then we hypothesized that the conversion issue could be resolved through on-page optimization. And ultimately, we were asking for too much information. I think a lot of forums on higher ed sites are guilty of this. So what we did was we reduced the required fields to simply name, email, and organization. Now, there was still conflict around this because my stakeholders really wanted that other information. They desperately wanted it for reasons I can't explain, but they just really needed to have a full picture of who this person was. So the compromise was, let's remove this barrier to entry, get them to download the white paper. But I will, in addition, create a nurture path, and then we will gather the other information as breadcrumbs downstream when we've built more of a relationship and have that trust built.
Okay, so we've already talked about this, obviously, in pretty big detail, but let's put some finer point on it. Why vanity metrics aren't enough. Okay, they don't show you progress toward business goals. We've referred to this a good amount. Metrics that show how well an ad performed on Meta don't show us how many applications were a result of those ads. If we only measure and report on platform native metrics, we stay ignorant of the full multi-touch user journey. And we can't accurately say how well a meta campaign performed, or, say we did a PR push, we can't measure the ROI, excuse me, of that PR push just based on, how many placements we got based on that press release or that campaign. Um, that doesn't tell us whether those placements actually led to anything that was a business goal. And they, or, say you're doing a Google Ads campaign, you can't determine how effective your Google ads are just based on clicks and impressions, click-through rate on those ads. So we're really talking about not measuring business outcomes. So the other reason is they don't give us any actionable insight in true form, even if we're talking about platform specific. So they obscure the true performance of that marketing work. You can't make a decision on how to optimize an ad precisely based on conversion data if you don't have attributable conversions to those ads. So say you're doing a Google Ads campaign, um, and you're doing an A/B test with two different ad variations, but you're only using click-through rate or cost per click to determine which is the winning ad of that A/B test. How do you know that the winning ad is actually the winning ad if you're only doing these platform-specific metrics? So variation A, for example, if it has a click-through rate of 5% and variation B has a click-through rate of 4%, you probably are going to choose based just on those numbers variation A. But what if variation B, which has the lower click-through rate, generated 25% more RFIs, more applications, and you didn't know that? And so you chose the wrong ad variation, and then your optimization is actually doing the opposite of what you're trying to do.
So let's talk about what is valuable. We've alluded to some of this already. So conversions, this feels obvious, but suffice it to say, they're still one of the best indicators of success. And what we listed here are pipeline metrics. So we're still at the top of the funnel, but they're huge indicators of measuring success and also trying to help you recreate the decision journey to a degree. Also, full funnel advanced analytics and those micro conversions. So those are things like those small measurable actions like page views, video plays, clicks on the website that then lead to conversion paths, newsletter subscriptions. If you take a look at this conversion funnel, it's organized by top, middle, and bottom funnel activities. Micro conversions, again, they're like all those small things that take place leading up to the primary conversion. So in a made-up example, we have a prospective student that's at that top of the funnel. They're doing their research, they're making it to the program page, they're clicking around, maybe reading testimonials, perhaps they're watching a program video. Whatever journey they're taking on all the different platforms they're on, they do eventually fill out an RFI form to take the next step. Again, you don't know how they got here. So I kind of want to wax poetic just for a minute longer on this slide, simply because I want to illuminate how important micro conversions are. Earlier, I mentioned that we don't have full insight into the decision journey. And so these are really the micro conversions, these are your clues. And when you look at the top, middle, and bottom phases of the funnel, only one of these stages reliably show up in your analytics, and that's the bottom funnel. And the rest, it's practically invisible. So influence is happening without a trackable interaction. You have departments working in silos, and most of their tech stack, probably all their tech stack, unless it's like Meta, doesn't play nicely with the other groups. And then again, ownership of student varies. So it is already an uphill battle to understand the downstream attribution. So as much as you can figure out at the top and middle parts of the funnel, the better. What is also valuable is high brand authority that shows up in AI. It's important that everyone is working together to build these trust signals for these large language models. because the more time your brand is mentioned in text that they're trained on, the more likely that your brand will appear in relevant prompts. And I know this is easily said than done because not all institutions have a silo breaker role that makes everyone consider the full student life cycle in marketing. So I really would just encourage everyone to champion this idea of just being your own silo breaker where possible, and not just thinking about your own slice of the work, but also how that work feeds into the institution's strategic goals, but especially the learner journey, because students are the only reason that we do this. I mean, that's the mission at the end of the day. Of course, there's other things, there's distractions, but I think sometimes because of the silos and the dysfunction and disjointedness of not just internal processes, but data, it's easy to forget why we're all what we're working towards, and that's student success.
Okay, so here, this is the M. Night Shyamalan moment. We've been talking a lot about how vanity metrics are not actually useful, but you do still have to pay attention to them. Platforms are greedy with traffic. They don't want users to click to your site. And overall brand performance metrics, things like platform native ad metrics, social engagement, branded search volume, they indirectly, as Alicia mentioned before, show brand authority, brand awareness. So because we can't see the full multi-touch attribution path in the user journey, we are somewhat forced to use these broader numbers and look for patterns and compare them and compare the different parts of that user journey, even though they're not connected and individual users attribution model is not there. So vanity metrics become valuable marketing data when we can use them to infer performance and compare positive growth in each stage of the funnel, even if full user journeys for individual users are not visible for us. So, the example here is an increase in followers and post engagement on Facebook. It indicates a higher awareness of your school in general, right? So that is going to hopefully trickle down to the next stages of the funnel. So what do? We try to connect the pieces that are disconnected. Rather than trying to attribute each application submitted to a specific form submission, to a specific organic search result, to a specific ad impression, all in a line with the different touches of that user journey, we have to zoom out and look at the patterns. So thinking about looking at things in the aggregate. So if these things don't align, then we can infer that something in our marketing effort is not performing well and needs to be optimized. So an increase in ad impressions during the ad campaign leads to an increase in branded organic search traffic. People who became aware of it in the first stage eventually searched for it by name in the second stage. Then eventually there's an increase in form submissions or RFIs showing that the branded search traffic, people came to our site and were convinced to become prospective students. Eventually, they apply, and we see an increase in applications submitted. So even though the traditional, multi-step user journey is not there for individual conversions or individual users, we can see whether or not each step on this funnel and each part of your marketing efforts contributes to the next. And if, say there's not an increase, say the first two stages, you do see an increase, and then your form submissions and RFIs go down or they don't go up at all. That shows you that something is amiss, right? Like maybe your ad campaign was great, but then people came to the site from organic search, and it's really hard to find information about housing for students, and they don't get convinced and they don't end up putting it on their list of schools to apply for. These are all the things that you have to, this is sort of the storytelling aspect that some of y'all mentioned. You have to do that analysis, which is much tougher than just looking at the numbers. But it's really what can also show your value as a marketer, being able to do that analysis and compare these things and get aggregated data that actually helps. So how do we connect the funnel? This is a example of a Looker Studio dashboard that potentially you could use to show your attribution path in the aggregate. So we've got the awareness stage of the funnel. This is that same example, right? So Instagram ad performance. You did a campaign, and we've got this Looker Studio dashboard set up so that your meta data comes in and you get 5,000 impressions, which is 21% over the previous February, right? Your ad CPM is $1.25, which is down 12% from the last time you did a campaign. That looks great, right? That's kind of the most obvious like vanity metric part. But it's not a vanity metric if we can compare it to the next phase, right? So after that, we've got some GA4 data. We've got 12,000 sessions in this time period, which is up 30% over that time last year. The views per session are up 3%, and the engagement rate is up 0.5%. This shows that the traffic that came in from branded organic search is high intent and probably, was part of a good um, meta ad campaign, right? So that is the connection there that was broken, but we can connect by using storytelling, by looking at aggregate data and looking at patterns. The next phase, consideration, we look at website conversions. So we have form submissions and GA4 RFI submissions up 26% and 31% year over year. Again, that's the next stage in the funnel, even though we can't see that those RFIs came from a particular session previously or that ad impression and click, we can, again, in the aggregate, see that the increase is keeping up as we go down the funnel. And then the final step, obviously, application. If it's also increased here, same thing. So it's really just thinking about uh, these numbers and this pattern of your funnel and how you can connect those disparate numbers. Oh my gosh, I lost the ability to advance slides. Okay, here we go. So where do we go from here? I kind of just told you. Really, it's just doing the best you can with the information that we have and looking at patterns. All you have to do is decide what to do with what you're given, as Gandalf said in this meme. Um, so yeah.
All right. Thanks, Jamie and Alicia. We'll turn it over to questions. But before we do, right here, there's a QR code. You can scan it for the slides, some additional resources, all free. And when you exit the webinar, there's also a survey that we'd love for you to take. We do take our audience feedback very seriously, and we work to improve and update our future webinars and content topics based on your feedback. So please fill out the survey, scan the QR code, and if you have any questions, we're all ears. I don't have any that came through currently, so maybe we'll give a couple minutes to see if anybody asks them in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll go from there.
That just means Jamie and I were so thorough.
Yeah, exactly. And then, like I said before, everybody will get a copy of the slides and a recording and some other freebies in their inbox tomorrow. All right. Well, I don't think, doesn't look like any questions
are coming
through.
There is. I think there is one in the general chat.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, I would say that so to Katie, your question, social followers, I would say that's one of the measures you can have of brand awareness. So that the very top of the funnel, I think, would be there. Maybe not on its own, but in combination with some of these other metrics we talked about.
Another question from Eleanor, Jamie, for that last slide, how can you be confident the increase in organic search was from your Instagram ad versus, say, your school doing well in March Madness?
And that's kind of where the do the best you can with what we're given part comes in. Unfortunately, you're going to have to look at the date range. And you could also potentially, depending on how much information you have in GA4 and in your other accounts, look at things like you could look at geographic data for those conversions. You could look at age range because while students may be interested in March Madness, it's probably their parents that are more likely to to get that boost in organic search from doing well in March Madness. So some of this, um, using as much of the data as you get, and again, looking for pattern recognition, I think. But that's a tough one, and that's kind of where we're at in the marketing landscape, unfortunately. Even Google Analytics doesn't give us all the information. Like 10 or 15 years ago, we used to get search query data in Google Analytics, and now we don't even get that. So, yeah, sorry, it's not a very helpful answer, but it's kind of the way it is.
We have another one that says, are there techniques for ensuring text does become part of AI search and LLM searches?
Yes, and there's a lot on the internet right now about this because it's a relatively new field, but generally anything that is going to help for SEO in general is likely to help you show up in AI search as well. Especially now that part of how LLM search works is they've got their training data where, traditionally the prompt, uses the text that that's trained on, but they also do what's called retrieval access generation, I believe, where they will also use a traditional search engine to look for information and look for um, sources for that info. So, ChatGPT uses Google search. So if you ask it for a list of schools with their websites, those websites probably came from traditional Google search. So all of that um, is fundamentally the same thing, even if there's differences in like what's most important. Um, it gets more complicated than that, but that's the short answer.
We still have a couple more minutes for a few more that came in. One from Chantel says, do web views still matter?
Yes, absolutely. I think that they probably matter the most in terms of like when you get to the bottom of the funnel. Um, it's just a matter of being able to connect them, using that pattern recognition.
And then one from Jonathan. Are people using niche for graduate level schools too? I'm in law school comms. Is that something that we should be more in tune with?
I would say it does feel more like an undergrad tool. I know that our representative at Niche, when I was working with them, they did try to get our graduate school to create like a page. What we ended up doing was I think we folded in some information because we already had the account for undergrad and we just kind of pulled the grad school link in. Niche would tell you yes. And they've done graduate school surveys each year saying we're the number one platform that prospective grad students will use to find their program. Maybe that's maybe that's true. However, anecdotally, I would say that grad students seem to be they tend to they are doing discovery on things like social media. However, many of them are using they're going directly to the school's program page. I sometimes feel like their decision journey is a little cleaner simply because they've already been through the admissions process before in their undergrad. They're not looking things up as much. Many times there's a loyalty where they will just go to their alma mater. And then other times they'll do a quick search like top like MBA programs based on geography or something like that. And then that's the program they pick. But most of the time they are tinkering around the actual grad school program page. So again, the niche thing I would take with a grain of salt. It never hurts to, I think, test and maybe it works for you, but I wouldn't say that that's necessarily the number one place. Maybe spend a minimal amount of effort working on that.
There's a final question that came through that I think is a really great one. We have some folks that sometimes don't like seeing red numbers and are hesitant about reporting it up the chain. Any experience on how to communicate in those situations?
I mean, I was in that situation all the time. And I think part of it goes back to the storytelling and you're reframing it around this is not a crisis, this is an opportunity. Why are our enrollments down? What do we need to correct? Why are we having great enrollments, admittances, and then why is our dropout rate unusually high sophomore year? That to me, again, educating and framing this to leadership as this is great. We have this knowledge and now we can do something about it. Otherwise, you're just sitting on your laurels and you're not doing anything to improve or increase your numbers. Like I would say, complacency. Those numbers sometimes look great, but there's always more you can be doing. And if again the red, okay, no leader likes to see red, but I think you have to spin it as something positive, which is we now have data to make a data-driven data-driven decision that will improve our business goals.
Yeah. I would add that the more opportunities for optimization before you get to the point where you have to report on is also useful here. So if you're A/B testing, I've said this a couple of times, but two ad variations. If you wait till the 90 days is up to make a decision on that, and you've got, red numbers that you have to report when you could have, made optimizations after 30 days and after 60 days, that's where that missed opportunity is there. So, part of that is, this extra tracking and measurement here that can help you with that and using that to have goals. And I feel like having a plan for, as Alicia said, what to do about the red numbers when you walk into that meeting or as a, summary of the report you're sending is the best way to,
Yeah,
CYA.
I second what Jamie said. Don't come with the problem, come with the solution. This is down, so these are the things we should try doing.
Yeah, that's great. Well, if there aren't any other questions, if you have, we do have 4 more minutes, but if not, we can sign off a little bit early and give you all your time back. And just thank you all so much. Like I said, you'll get a follow-up email tomorrow with the recording, slides, and some other insights. So thank you.
Thank you all.